And welcome to the React Show, episode 9000 or 15. Take your pick. Less code, better code, and your best friend. DSLs. Anyways, yeah, we got an awesome show, and it's me, Thomas, with my co-host, the amazing, the wonderful, the undefeatable Austin. Welcome to the show.
How do you?
That was so enthusiastic. Do you have anything better than that?
Just a gentlemanly tap hit, hat tip, undefeatable strikeout on the first sentence.
It's okay. It'll be fine.
We'll make it.
Yeah. So. I think we're having a lot of fun here, but it is going to be a good show. We're going to talk about domain-specific languages, and you may not be familiar with that, but we'll talk about what that is and what it means and why. Once you've done bottom-up programming, it's where I go next with developing high-quality programs. So yeah, we'll talk all about that. But first, as a reminder, if you have feedback or questions, if I was a little too obnoxious on that intro or something, which I'm sure wasn't the case, if you want to hear more of that, let me know. The React Show at owlcreek.studio. So we can get into it. I think Austin had. Did you want to give your little audience shout outs now, or is that later?
Oh yeah. So looking at we host our podcast on Buzzsprout, and we were looking at the leaderboards, and we wanted to give out a shout out to the top 3 platforms. We have Spotify, Castbox, and Google Podcasts. To all you listeners out there who keep coming back, we love you, and let us know. Yeah, get in touch at the React Show at owlcreek.studio and let us know what you love, why you're subscribed. It'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Austin. And coming up after that, we have a special in this episode. So I'm sure everyone like me has been dying to know, how did Austin get into programming? What got you into it? Why do you do it? What's been your journey? Yeah, we're going to talk about that, and I'm really excited because I don't even know. So yeah, let's get it. How'd you get started, Austin? What's your story?
Well, I was always enjoying on the computer. I think web design wise or web development was maybe back when MySpace was a thing and you could like customize your AIM profiles and your MySpace profile with CSS and blah blah. Then like got into Android stuff in college, and then that like got me in touch with all of the working with like an operating system and such. And then
sorry, I'm gonna cut in here because I am really.
Please do, yeah. Otherwise, I'm just gonna monologue.
Yeah, I mean, the monologue is fine, but I'm more curious about the first stuff. How did you get into it at all, and like, how did you learn it? Like, was it a class? Did you teach yourself? Like, how did that go?
Oh, with software? Well, yeah, I did IT in college with like a web development concentration. It was a total bogus degree. They were just trying to crank out like
you said you did
ants for the government.
You said you did like CSS or something on the web before that?
Oh yeah, on MySpace. It was
way
like
back. I want to go way back
online.
Yeah, way back to the beginning.
Way back.
Like what was your first thing? What got you into it? How did you know about it, or how did you know what to do the first time? Yeah.
Well, I guess around like it was just like fun learning how to use a computer to do stuff, not necessarily programming, but like I remember I like found when Google AdWords was like just coming out and you could make Google ads on your websites. I like made this network of blogs with some guys on an IRC chat, and we just like had proxies clicking each other's blogs about like asbestos and like lawyer stuff, and we were just like playing around with like having all of these services running.
If I ask how old about you were then?
I was like 16 maybe, or
All
like
right.
maybe 16 to, yeah,
Yeah,
around
yeah.
16.
Awesome. So you were like really
That was
attracted
fun.
to that, to being able to do things like that. Is that what got you into it?
Well, it was cool. Yeah, like an ad for like a certain type of like lawyer was like running for like $50 a click, like at that point. And
Mhm.
so you just had to like SEO keyword your website, and
Yeah.
then we had like a proxy network and just were had a nice check coming from Google.
This is really fascinating. Well, we're gonna talk about maybe my background later, but there's actually a pretty strong tie-in there. So this is really cool. Anyways,
You're probably in the same channel as me.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't think so because it's a little different story, but very similar, like a lot of similarities. Yeah. Um, so
Yeah, that's where it began, I guess, where I was like, "Ooh, this like I can do things on the internet."
okay, so
And that was like,
how did you figure out what to do? Like how did you learn this stuff? Was anybody like, "Oh, hey, this is how to do it?" Or did you just like come upon it yourself or
well, I mean, I think there's like humanity progresses when it's in like a tight spot and it's like it needs to get into a better spot and it squeezes itself out. And I was like, man, I don't want to have to like I don't want to work this much as much this summer. Like how can I make it easier on me? And then I like I think I was into blogging actually, or some like I was like making blogs like on, yeah, because it went from like AIM profiles to like Zynga or something to live journals, and you could like make all these like blogs and stuff. And I think I eventually got like I found WordPress and it was like whoa, like, or I just stuck with blogger.com by
mm,
Google because
mhm.
they had a really simple template and it was directly integrated with the ads, like you could easily get ads on your blog. So I just like started making all these blogs to see if they would like bring in clicks, and then I was just like there's got to be a way that like I can click my own ads, right? And so I was like, oh, I can literally. So I like started making myself a proxy network of my own. And then through the forces of the internet, like some guy like appeared like a wizard and just like sent me an IRC chat room. And it was like, like at least 5,000 people probably doing this all
Oh.
together, like in a shared like proxy network.
Wow.
So it was like, oh, I was like, oh, where, like, how do I find this? And it was like one of those links where I forgot to bookmark it. And I was like, wait, what's the link again? How do I get there? Like, oh no. And I forgot the link.
Oh
And I
no.
think it's gone. It's definitely long gone. You cannot get in trouble. You would get in big trouble nowadays. Google knows way too much. It was just way
Yeah.
too early in Google's game. You could play with it.
Yeah, I remember those days. I didn't really do, go down that route of, proxying a bunch of clicks or anything. Yeah, I mean, you know me, I'm one of those weird, like, oh no, I got to do it the right
Dude,
way.
$100 days, man. Easy
Yeah,
$100 days.
that's so interesting because like I remember those days, and I remember when like that was like becoming a thing that everyone started doing basically. Like, like that was the way you made money on these types of things.
Make a blog and retire and work on the
Yes,
beach. Just
exactly.
make a blog.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, no, that's really fascinating. So yeah, that's how you got into it. And so it sounds like you sort of taught yourself just by doing web searches. I mean, was this on like AOL or?
Yeah, and of course, like the moment that we like literally start podcasting in the quietest corner of anywhere, like there comes a kid wanting to play like tic tac toe or something. But
What?
it's great. Um, so yeah, it was always like I went to college to learn. Uh, I did like an IT degree with web development and business development concentration. It was more like they were trying to make a bunch of drones to work for the government contracting firms, like just hey, cookie
Mm,
cutter a person into Booz Allen or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, this sucks. So after I got out of that, I realized like I like learning what I like to learn, and I
Hmm.
want to do what I want to do. And so like I dream a lot, and so I could like learn how to do things. And I was like, okay, like how can I make this possible? And then just you learn how to use Google, right?
Yeah.
And then Google like opens up the world to you because you just have to search whatever you want. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like, oh, someone's gonna teach me for free. For free. I can do all this for free. So yeah,
Yeah.
people are like, oh wow, you do programming. Like, man, it must be so nice. I'm like, I'm literally an idiot. Anyone can do this. Like, it just takes a long time. It takes a long time to be like a good professional idiot, but like
I
you
love it.
anyone can do it.
The undefeatable, amazing, wonderful Austin's like, I'm an idiot.
Well, hey, like the more I don't know, every day I think I know something, I realize, I don't know, and it just gets worse every day where
Yeah.
I am an idiot.
It's
We're all idiots.
it's like that thing where, in our profession, we might market ourselves as experts, but I always feel like the more of an, quote expert I become, the more I feel like I don't know as much.
Oh, for sure. And then I write you on Slack, and I'm like, dude, I have no clue what's going on right now with this code.
Yeah. I mean, that could be a whole nother fun episode talking about that whole feeling that we get and everything. But yeah, I think this is really fascinating. So what I'm hearing from you is like a lot of, sort of self-taught. Maybe, you had a vision of something you wanted, and so you went out and figured out how to build it. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I want to live life on my own terms, and I am lucky that I got into computers. And it's like, oh wow, like now this little hobby as a kid where I would like get on and make CSS like themes on whatever journal. Now I'm like able to literally, I'm in some random hotel in New Jersey doing a podcast talking about stuff that no one has a clue even exist. Like it's like whatever, like I'm pretty happy drinking my coffee and chilling,
Yeah, awesome.
work
Well,
wherever I want. It's crazy what you can do.
yeah. So if you had like anything you wanted to say to, maybe the 16-year-old Austin or somebody else that might be just getting into programming, would you have anything you'd want to say to them? Doesn't have to be advice. It can be, but does anything come to mind?
Well, the only thing I can think about now is like, I mean, I'm not old. I hit 30, but I just am like, man, I'm 30 years old. And like, I look back on what I've done and I'm like, I've done some crazy stuff. But I think the real power comes in when you do something continuously for a long time. And I would be like, hey, find that project or find that idea and like don't stop, don't give up on trying to make it work. Cause like you're always gonna come back to it. Just try to like come back to it earlier and just keep coming back to it and it will work out. And I wish I had done that much sooner because
Hmm.
I'm like finally following through with all this stuff that I knew I could do. And it's like, oh my God, like I could have done this. Maybe I wasn't ready,
Hmm.
but like maybe it took until now, right? But
Yeah.
you have to start as early as you can. Otherwise, like you could just be setting yourself back.
Yeah, I have
So
similar feelings to that. It makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, so I hope everyone liked that. We got a little taste of Austin's background here, and if you want to
make
learn
sure you
more,
come to the next episode. Thomas is coming in and we're gonna learn.
oh boy,
So yeah, you can email me directly at aw@Owl Creek Studio if you want to drop a line.
oh boy.
Oh boy.
There are some people that are. I don't think you should read their lines, their emails. I think some people need to be left out of this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe the fan mail will come in. I think it's just gonna be crickets, but we'll see.
I don't know if they're fans. That wasn't what I had in mind.
You think I'm already drawing that many haters to this freak address? Come on.
I don't know what connections you have to my past or something. We need to keep some things out of it.
Your past.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. I thought you were talking about if people wanted to say anything about me. I was like, I don't. Why would you want to do that?
No, no, no. If people want to come talk to about me, right? Like say, hey, Austin,
Oh,
I liked
I see. Yeah,
your.
yeah, yeah.
No, sorry.
Oh,
I
I'll be
think I
sending a lot
tangent
of.
jumped.
Yeah, I'll be sending a lot of emails to that address then.
All right, great, great.
I don't know about anyone
It's
else, but
lonely otherwise. It's very lonely.
yeah.
So what's after? Yeah, you can reach out to me if you like. What's we get back to bottoms up DSL.
Yeah. Yeah, let's get into the main show then. We've learned a lot from Austin. Now we're going to learn more about Austin's experience with domain specific languages. So that'll be fun.
Is this just a highlight of my invincible like qualities or something?
That wasn't planned, I swear. Anyway, yeah, so we could talk about what actually is a DSL. So I don't know, Austin. I know I've mentioned it to you before, but you don't have to define it. I'm just curious if you have any idea of what a DSL is.
Well, it's like there's certain things that do certain things. So like if you're going to be like so a domain specific language is like there's this language that you use to do a very specific thing, and like if you see a file or written in that language, it's most likely doing that. Like one is sending around like readme files and being like, hey, this is not like what a MD file is, this formatting, it's markdown, right? It's that's the domain it's used in.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
further up the tree of languages.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point that I didn't think of. Markdown would be considered probably like a domain specific language of a cross between like human and machine readable text. Like I think that was the goals of it. And yeah, so it could be considered a DSL of that. I had some other examples as
An
well.
attempt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I didn't want to look at your
Yeah.
examples
No,
because I felt like it'd be cheating.
yeah, it would be. You would be off the show if you did that.
Yeah, that's why I literally was looking away from the screen. I was like, don't look,
Yeah.
don't do it.
Yeah, I think you make a great point though that, like org mode would be a much better version of the same thing. Markdown is like a not a very well done version of org mode, but
I wouldn't even call it a tool. It's not even a crude like implement. It can't even be defined as anything compared to org mode. Pretty much.
yes, I might overuse I might glorify org mode. That may or may not be true. But anyways, we will move on from that. Other examples would be HTML. So HTML is a domain specific language for web pages. And it's interesting to bring up, I think, because you'll see in like a lot of our modern web applications, a lot of times we're sort of fighting against the original intentions of HTML. And a lot of that's because the domain specific language was originally created for just displaying text and hyperlinks between text. But anyways, yeah, we'll talk about some other examples, which would be grep, if you've ever used that, or like regular expressions. Those are, domain specific languages for searching text. SQL is one a lot of people know about. That's a domain specific language for relational databases. And I think for sure another domain specific language, and I've mentioned this before, is React itself. It's a domain specific language for interactive web applications. So it's sort of different than HTML, which was for document-based websites. React is for interactive web applications, and I totally think that qualifies as well for a DSL.
Well, it's quite interesting because it's like React is like it's its own language within JavaScript, but it's not just JavaScript, it's all these other things. So it's like a domain specific paradigm, or like I don't know. It's like,
Yeah, there's a
yeah,
name
where
for
the
it.
what the point is, yeah, there
Yeah,
is.
so that React is what we would call, it's not 100% this, but it's mostly what we would call an embedded domain specific language. So we'll talk.
Mm.
We're actually going to talk about that very shortly. So yeah.
It's literally like in 2 bullet points. I'm sorry.
No,
I
no,
do
no.
that.
You
I skip.
shouldn't.
I
You
didn't
shouldn't
look
be
though.
sorry. That was the perfect tie-in, I think, and a really organic way of bringing it up. Like, I was going to define it as well, but I love how you defined it. But first, before we get there, I want to start by defining what a DSL is, like in general, and that is a DSL is a programming language, or maybe not even a language, a programming system that it has primitives specific to a domain of some kind. So that's in contrast to like JavaScript or C or Java, which are general purpose languages that you can use to do anything. And
And when you say primitives, real quick, you're not talking about barbarians. You're talking about like things that interface directly with like machine layer of the computer, where it's like or what would you
Sort of.
consider like?
Yes. So a primitive to me is what makes up a language. So if you are programming in JavaScript and someone says, write me a function that calculates the Fibonacci sequence of, these numbers, you're going to be thinking in terms of maybe a function, maybe recursion, maybe I forget what Fibonacci even is, but some arithmetic primitives. Maybe you're going to do it with a loop. There's those types of things are what I call the primitives, because they're the things that when you like buy a book on JavaScript that you learn, this is what makes up JavaScript. This is the way it works.
Okay.
That's what I'm calling a primitive. So it's not like,
So it's like the letters, it's not the letters you use to write, it's what you use to write the letters in.
yeah, I think it's very similar to natural language. So we're talking in English, and we have words, and we have sentences, and there's grammar. All of those things are, to me, what make up the language of English. And I think it's the same with a general purpose programming language. You have syntax, you have essentially grammar that you follow, you have words, which your vocabulary, that type of thing. Those are that's your language. Those are your primitives of that language.
Okay.
Yeah, I think technically
Roger.
it's more than, I'm really describing more than just primitives. Primitives might be each of those parts by themselves, and then you have like grammars or whatever that bring those primitives together. That's probably a better definition, yeah. But that's really what I mean by a programming language.
Right. It's like the most fundamental. They're like the building blocks,
Yes.
the
Yes.
primitive like objects that make you go ooh ooh and make
Yeah, exactly.
ooh, ooh.
The building blocks. I don't know about the ooh part, but the building blocks is
No,
literally
I was just
how I
using
think of
my
it.
small brain language with the primitives. Oh, ooh. Okay.
Yeah, no, building blocks is exactly how I think of it. What are the building blocks of this language? And you can look at, like assembly language or C, and those building blocks are way different than JavaScript. Like in C and assembly, you have building blocks for managing memory that don't really exist in JavaScript.
That's for sure.
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about. And so when we talk about a domain-specific language, it's those same things, but where the vocabulary and the grammar and the primitives are all revolving around a specific domain. So, like we talked about regular expressions, that is a domain specific language for parsing text. And there's like, /D or whatever for matching a digit. That's like a primitive of that domain language.
Dude, regex. That's like a whole multiverse.
Yeah, I mean it is. It's its own domain. That's
right.
And you to be good at it, you have to learn that language in that domain, and you have to learn how to think in that domain.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. That's like what the domain is like it's something that it's a way of like implementing and learning and thinking and working. That's like kind of you put on a mask or something to go in and like you embody this aspect or to create this thing through that framework. It's really kind of trippy.
Yeah. And think about this too. Like React is the same way. Like you're thinking in terms of hooks probably and components, and that's also a domain. And if you don't know React, and like, so we're working with someone at our consultancy right now who is learning React, and so you can see this like they're not currently thinking in terms of those things yet because they don't know that domain very well. They don't know that language very well, but it's something they're learning. And so that's how I think of React. I think of it as a domain-specific language for these interactive web applications where you learn what hooks are, you learn how to work with them, you learn what components are, you learn how to work with them, you learn how to handle effects, like all those things are domain-specific for this case.
Yeah, it reminds me of a domain I'm currently entering where it's like a old busted Rails server with probably like at least 10,000 freaking CSS files, and I'm like, okay, like oh boy, here we go.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So
That's
yeah, it's crazy.
a domain.
You're an expert in one domain, and then you jump to the next, and you're like, but there is a carryover, which is cool. So like, I feel like programming is like one of the ultimate carryover domain. Like I would say once you really start to become proficient at programming to some degree, you access like some sort of philosophical paradigm to life where you can like deconstruct how things are happening with like the same patterns you would do with a software application, right?
Yep.
I'm not saying we're robots or anything, but I feel like it creates this ability to break things down and like iterate in life across spectrums.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to natural languages as well in that like if you learn a few, from what I've heard, I haven't learned too many, but it gets easier and easier because you start being able to recognize these patterns, and you're just like, it's the same for programming. For me, I know a lot of languages. I've worked with a lot of languages, so it doesn't matter if it's a domain-specific language or a general-purpose programming language. I'm just like, oh yeah, I recognize all these different elements of it, and so I can learn it very quickly and pick it up quickly. But it's certainly true that like, especially when you're getting started, it's a lot harder, and it definitely takes a lot longer, and it feels a lot worse initially.
Oh yeah, it is like the opposite of it's very difficult. It's funny, like, and it's very clear when you like see someone in that stage where you're just like able to think like in a totally different way, and then you have to go back and teach in the way that they are at, and it's like it's very insightful.
Yeah, definitely. We can talk about, I think, now the embedded DSLs. So, and the reason
Are you sure?
Yeah,
you ready?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
Okay. I'm ready.
No, so there's like different DSLs. Like A CSS file would be a DSL for styling web pages, and it would live in its own file. It's not, I mean, you can kind of embed it in HTML, but it's still its own thing. It's like separate, its own, block of code. Um, and then,
Yeah, you embed it literally.
well,
Will you?
my
you
point is it's not really as embedded. It's more of a standalone language. Like, whereas an embedded DSL is something more like React, where it's mixed in with the JavaScript. Like they're kind of all mixed
Oh, okay.
together. And React is sort of
So
built
it's
out of.
embedded into an ESL, whereas CSS is like it goes alongside the
Yeah.
HTML and the Java. Yeah, I
Yeah,
get you.
CSS is sort of like its own language, its own DSL, but it's not really mixed in with the HTML directly. I mean, there's a little bit of crossover, so it's not a perfect example, but
Well, nowadays you can do it mixed in with your JS too. So
yeah. I mean, in the olden days, when Austin and I were getting started, it was always a separate, style sheet or
when I
whatever.
still had teeth.
Yeah, exactly. No, Austin still had teeth. I don't know what happened. I still have teeth, but maybe I'm a lot younger than
It just
Austin.
happened. I like hit them with my lips, and then they came back. It was really cool.
Nice. I can't do that either. But yeah, so there are different like types of DSLs. Like SQL would be another one where it's not necessarily embedded. It's usually like a string or something like that. It's its own thing, and it'll be in your code, but you're not usually mixing it. Whereas React is built out of the components of JavaScript, and it is used to it like fully integrates with it. Now it's not entirely true because usually you do React with JSX code, and JSX is also a DSL, which is like in its and it gets compiled separately. But generally, I think of React as being a DSL, embedded DSL. Sorry, that's what we've been talking about. So it's it's specific to these interactive applications. So the reason why I'm bringing it up is because my focus of this episode is really on embedded DSLs, because my goal when I'm writing applications is to end up with a DSL for that application. Like, say you're writing inventory management software. I will do it in a bottom-up way, but eventually I hope to be at the point where maybe my hooks and components are their own language that revolves around inventory and managing it and what happens to it and maybe displaying it and that kind of thing. So that's why I specifically wanted to talk about embedded DSLs.
Yeah, no, it's great. I like where flow. You can't hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry. He was looking at me and was like, I can't hear you. I turned it off because some kids started playing Connect 4, like, and dumping them all over the ground.
Oh.
Yeah, no, what you're saying is there's like, what you're saying is like creating specific to this domain, like paradigming your application development. It kind of ties in with what I want to talk to you in the next episode on like creating flows around like what people actually do, right? What defining that domain intensively.
Yeah, definitely. I think now we'll get into the why, because I think that's important to, having people be interested in doing DSLs and doing them well. So why DSL? Why should you do domain-specific languages? And I have a few reasons why I find them to be worthwhile. The first and most important one is related to languages and our brains. And I look at it this way. Why do you use a programming language at all? Why aren't you writing microcode that the CPU can just run? Like, there's a reason for it. It's because we have weak brains, as Austin was telling us earlier.
Can't you do that if you use org mode?
Yes. So in org mode, you could no, I mean you could actually. So org mode has this way where you can you can interleave your code. And so like the book I wrote has code that I can also run, and it's interleaved with the book. And anyways, that's a whole nother thing. Why did you do that, Austin? You're such a bad person.
Sorry, you brought up. But no, this topic is coming up again where we've been interfacing with like our users at our work, and we're trying to like figure out a way we can communicate with them and they can communicate with us, so we can like evolve like a more effective workflow together as a team. And then it's like what you're saying, it's the same thing, but it's like you're creating and using a toolkit environment to be able to like specifically achieve something that like that you have, and like picking the right tools for that environment.
Yeah, to me, it's like I have noticed that my brain thinks in the language that I'm operating in. So, like when in a natural language sense, I formulate sentences and stuff in English because that's what I'm usually working in. And it's the same with programming. If I'm doing mostly JavaScript work, anytime someone comes to me with a problem, my brain starts formulating JavaScript solutions. And it's going to be based on the primitives and the grammar and the syntax of JavaScript. Um, so like, yeah, that's the way I think of it. Is I think it's a very connected thing to the way our brains function. And so to me, I think any way that we can embrace that to, sort of gain more from it than like a more, general purpose language or a natural language. Like the more we can take out of that, the more we can develop it, the better the programs we're going to write. And I'll get into the reasons why here. But like, think about like one example would be React versus not having React. So say you don't have React or anything like it. You don't even have underscore or any of or jQuery or any of the things we used before. Like all you have is JavaScript and the browser DOM APIs on one hand, and on the other hand you have React and all the stuff we're used to working with. Now, if you're on the side where you only had JavaScript, and somebody says, "Hey, make me a to-do list," your brain is immediately going to be like, "Okay, so I'm going to need to store these to-dos somehow, so I'll put them in a variable maybe, and I'm going to need to like update the DOM, and so I need to call these DOM APIs, and then when the user types in stuff into this, I need to like capture that and store it in this, so you're going to be thinking in those terms, very like sort of low level. Whereas like with React, if you're like, oh, I need to build the to-do list, you'll all of a sudden be like, oh, okay, I could just have a component for this and this and this, and a state variable to hold them, and it'll just work. Like you're totally thinking in a different way.
Right, and it's like, oh, which JS did this? The complexity overhead just to make a to-do list, it's insane.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah, that's
that's
cool. I recently wrote uh I did as kind of like a challenge. I hadn't written in just like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in a while, and I like made this lady I did yoga with. I made her website just like I do any compilers or anything. Like I didn't have any packages. It was just everything was vanilla, and it was fun like creating some like view rendering functions that were kind of similar to React, and being able to leverage like a string templating system where I could like print out like I was want to get to like iterating list and stuff. You're like, oh, I don't want to like write out a HTML file with like 15 list items copy pasted. Like I should do this with JavaScript perhaps. And like creating, it was pretty similar to React in terms of I kind of was able to take that paradigm over to just regular JavaScript without the tool, right? So you
Hmm.
can domains, I guess, can like they can transfer across domains, and like the paradigms can be used elsewhere, right, outside of their domain,
Yeah, yeah,
but
definitely.
maybe not as a best practice. I don't know.
Well,
But
no, like the paradigms can certainly be carried over. I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, so I guess the next part I'll get to is the closer the language is to your domain, the less our brains have to think about the mechanics of things. And that was like the example we were just talking about. React is closer to our domain, so we don't have to think about a lot of the underlying things related to keeping the DOM in sync with our state and stuff like that. And so that frees up our brain to focus more on the task we're actually trying to accomplish. And that's the biggest reason why I am a huge fan of DSLs. And that's because I think they allow our brains to think about solving domain problems, which is what we're ultimately always trying to do, instead of worrying about getting all the mechanics below it correct. And the other part of this is the realization that if you build these DSLs, you are reusing your code in a really solid way. You're not reusing it in like ways that aren't extendable. Generally, these domain-specific languages, you might reuse the same primitive hundreds of times if you define your primitives well, because they will be applicable in all sorts of cases. And so that means you can put extra time into designing that language and testing that code and making sure that code is solid. And it'll really pay off because now you've got a really solid core and foundation to your entire app. And so some other programmer can join your team. And as long as they understand the domain, they can just start working with those domain tools and primitives right away without being mired in the mechanics of how it works underneath, because you've already made sure that is solid code that works well and it's composable. And so to me, it's like a really effective and value-oriented way of developing an application.
yeah, and well, this is why client they have like a React, and it's like in order for anyone on that team to do the full stack, they have to know both languages and know both domains like very specifically. And I'm like, like JavaScript, it might not be the like one tool to rule them all, but like if I have to build something nowadays, I'm like, I'm going to stick within that domain so that I can just like I can create stuff instead of having to like look at all the, oh, what could I do here or there or everywhere and some other different and set things up. And you're like your context switching when you jump back and forth between applications is there's like a lot less drag. Yeah, I'm a fan of DSL programming for sure.
So that you bring up a really, really major point for me, which is, you've heard me talk about Lisp, right? So this is actually the primary reason why I'm such a big fan of Lisp, because in Lisp, you can create better DSLs. Because it allows you to create new syntax that you cannot do in like JavaScript. And so if you hear me talking about like liking or disliking languages, a lot of times it revolves around this point specifically. So like I hate Java. And one of the reasons why I hate it is because I feel super constrained whenever I try to make a DSL. Like it doesn't really let me do anything at all. It's like your Java code will be vanilla Java code unless you want to like do really wacky reflections stuff that's really bad. Like to do normal, like it's not what it's made for. And that's where like I always talk about Lisp, because in Lisp I can write my like you were talking about, Austin. I can write everything in Lisp because it's so good at embedded DSLs. So like, I've written a Lisp application where my back end is Lisp, my front end is Lisp. literally everything is Lisp, and it all is awesome because it all talks to each other and works well together, and they're all their own DSL at the same time. Um, so that's why, yeah. Well, we could have another topic or whatever about languages, but like to me, domain specific languages are one of the primary things I look for in a language.
Yeah, I was I was going to. You couldn't hear me again?
I can hear
It
you
showed the
now.
green thing on my icon. Okay, good. Well, I was saying for the Lisp thing, I was gonna make a joke and be like, "Hey, do they make React for Lisp, right?" And but then you're going into that, you can actually create a full stack application, and it's like that's pretty cool. I didn't know that, and
Yeah.
I guess maybe it's time to finally listen to you and cave in,
Well,
and
it's
we become a Lisp studio, Owl Creek
well, it's
Lisp experts.
it's really interesting because there were basically React. I built my own version of React in Lisp long before it existed, but I wasn't the first one. A lot of people have because it's the
Does it
nat.
have hooks?
No, no, it doesn't need hooks.
I'm kidding with you.
No, it's
Exactly.
I will have to show you some pretty like incredible integration. Like the sort of relational like SQL languages can be DSLs in Lisp. Prolog, so logic languages, can be DSLs in Lisp. And so I've taken advantage of all of that, and it's I love it. It makes me so happy. It makes me feel so good. But like, yeah. So that's you're totally right. That's why I like it.
No, it's awesome. Yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah, it's
And
yeah. Go on.
no, that's great. But I do think that yeah, we could go into languages in another episode and stuff. I don't want to throw you off the DSL
No, I think it was
overarching
a
theme.
great thing to bring up. You know, DSLs are just really important to me, and so I got to rant a little bit more about that.
Well, I think it all comes down to like they help you be more effective and be better at what you do, and it's like
Yeah.
it's a case for specialization, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Yep.
hey, if you really want to go far with something, like if you spread too little butter over too much bread, it ain't gonna taste too good. So it's like just like focus on your one area and get like intimate with that DSL in your own way, and then you can solve things and actually create new paradigms in the DSL itself, like and
Mm-hmm.
continue to yeah. Sorry, it's such a broad topic. It's like it's
Yeah.
hard not to like get spaced out dreaming about like what is like this is cool, a good concept.
Yeah. I mean,
You literally just like bring me on this podcast to like give me a like a mind jar. It's like
I-
like
there's like,
like
yeah.
the last 3 episodes.
I mean,
Thanks.
there's reasons why I like working with you, and this is one of them because I have run into a lot
Someone
of
to just make.
no, because what I'm trying to say is I've run
Have you ever seen
into
Rick and Morty?
no.
Okay, I feel like I'm your Morty. You're my
Well,
Rick.
what I'm trying to say though is like I've run into a lot of resistance to DSLs, especially at corporations who see them as sort of the enemy of the code monkey interchangeable cog in the machine, because it is something that you need to learn. So I think you and I see the value in it, and we're like it's worth learning. But I've run into a lot of resistance both from companies that are like, no, we don't want anything like that. We want our vanilla Java because we want to just be able to throw programmers at it, and we aren't very smart and think that works. I strongly believe that that is the wrong way. I mean, that brings up another great point. I didn't even think to put on the list. Like, domain specific languages allow you to have what I think are more effective teams without, you can add more programmers more effectively to a team to get more done, but you don't necessarily need to, because the underlying language does a lot of the heavy lifting. And it also allows you to create a clean separation in your team. So you could have a whole team dedicated to the domain specific language if you were had those resources. And then the people on top of that would just work with that language. And so you could scale your team better than the Java situation where it's like, let's put 50 programmers on the same application, all doing the same thing. And we all know how that turns out. Like, if you're being honest, it turns out horribly. Like, you don't get much
That
done. It's a
sounds like
mess.
such a bad idea.
It's what happens. I've been in that situation so many times.
That's dumb.
Yeah, I'm with you there, but I'm just letting you know, like, if you're listening to this and you're getting all excited to carry this out, you may run into resistance. And the other resistance I've run into is actually with other programmers. So I think, you know, you and I, Austin, we are definitely like the, you know, sort of curious, like want to get better. Like we're in this for more than just a paycheck. There's other programmers that's not how they look at this profession. Like, and I don't think that's anything wrong with them. That's just, they aren't interested in doing this all the time. They want to learn Java or JavaScript or whatever it is and just keep writing it and not have to learn new things, you know?
Hey, was that a call out?
It really wasn't meaning to be. I've run into it many times, and it's like one of those things where, I don't know, we should probably save that for another topic, but I just wanted to call it out. Like, if you're somebody listening to this, that is also something to be aware of. And I'm not like judging that. Maybe that is the right thing for that person. But
yeah, for sure. Like maybe it's easy. They don't have to even use their brains. They
right.
can
Yeah.
just have a nice cushy job
Exactly.
and like
Yep.
have fun with their family. Not insulting you at all. Like that's a perfectly
Yeah.
acceptable form of life.
Right.
Yeah.
It is. I'm just saying, like, yeah, Austin and I are definitely not like that. And so when we talk about this, we're talking about it in terms of like our ideals and stuff. Like, let's make our programs better. Let's do things faster. Let's be more efficient. Let's have more value. Like, that's a different value.
This is where that hate mail is gonna come in.
Yeah,
now, right?
I mean, well, it's a different value proposition to people that are like, programming is my day job and I just want to sit down and do the same thing and think as little as I can and then go home and do my hobbies and hang out with my kids. And so that's also a thing I've run into, which, yeah. So I think now we should get into though, how do you actually do this? So now you're excited about it, like Austin and I, you know, like you want to start doing DSLs. Like, where do you get started? And I'll be upfront and say that it's not always super straightforward or super easy if you try to like force yourself into it and think really hard about it. I think the best way by far is based on bottom-up programming, which we talked about recently. And so what I do is, like I said in bottom-up programming, I don't think about the DSL to start. I just write my code. But then when I'm looking at how to go back and improve my code, I am looking for a potential domain-specific language. So in React, I might be like, one example that I think is this really super tiny thing that I call a domain-specific language, and that is the hook for like when you want to run code once when the page loads. You will see everywhere people writing use effect, blah, 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 and then an empty dependency array, right? And you're like, sure, that's fine. What's wrong with that? I look at that and I'm like, hey, I'm seeing a pattern here. What is this pattern? What is the intention of this code? What are we trying to do here? And I then try to formulate that into, you know, sort of an English language natural way of describing it. And so when Austin and I had talked about this, I thought use once made sense. Other people might do, use on mount or something that makes sense to them as like a better way of thinking about it. Because then when somebody else comes and they're like reading through this code, they're like, oh, use once. Like that's a concept in my brain that makes sense. Whereas like seeing use effect with an empty dependency array we're kind of always translating it. And I would, look at that and be like, okay, I want to start thinking in this higher level language of the intent of the code. So the intent of this code is I only want it to run once when this component first loads. And so that's like my approach to developing a domain specific language in that case. Now, it might be you're looking to make a domain specific language for your inventory management application. In that case, I might be like, oh, hey, look, I'm using this same like hook all over the place to adjust my inventory. And it's named, probably something really generic or whatever. So I might look at that and be like, okay, what is the intent of this hook? And are there parts shared amongst, in this hook that might be, better put in a new hook that's more generic, that describes the intent of certain blocks of code. So that's my way of doing it, is I take my existing program and I just comb through it looking for these things. And I start playing around with it. And I might make mistakes. I might come up with the wrong primitives. But what I do is I'll make these changes and see how it reads, see if it changes the way I think to be more in line with the domain I'm in. So now that I've ranted a lot, do you have any thoughts on this one, Austin?
Well, it made me think about function. And so I was like, you can't hear me at all?
It was going in and out. Maybe restart. Sorry.
Maybe I was just going slow.
No.
So like we used to use component did mount, right, in the class-based functions, and I was thinking like, okay, the only thing, like, why not literally make a hook called component did mount, right?
Yep.
And like then I was like, oh, but we're missing the like previous props and the previous state, and then I was like, oh well, you can do a use previous hook, and you could somehow like collect all of the state items into like an object, and all of the props into an object, or into the props into these previous props and previous state, and then like pass that in if you wish to have access to that, right?
Yeah.
When like component did update or something. So I was just thinking about like how to use hooks as a paradigm for like doing these domain specific ones, and how to create helpers. And it's like, it just seems like a lot of boilerplate up front to be able to like put in the previous state, all of the state, right? Because we're now all using use state like 5-10 different times. And instead of like state as an object anymore, it's like each thing is its own little micro state.
Yeah, that makes me think. So when you're thinking about that situation, like, what is the intent of this code? Because that's how I would approach it and be like, what are we trying to do in all these cases? Can we now re-describe it using a different noun or verb,
Well, it's been making, after we've gone into these episodes on use effect a few times, it's made me like look at the React code I'm writing. I'm like, wait, do I even need to like set state in here at all? Like, can I just somehow like conditionally like be more mindful about just conditionally rendering different things based on the props that are coming in, and not even trying to manage any state or run off any effect? And like, it's just been looking at things a lot more differently, and it's made me clean up my code a bit more in a way that I like. So I thank you for all these talks we have.
Oh, definitely. If you don't mind, I want to maybe sort of tease out something from that example you gave with like use previous. And you're giving me that look like, oh no, don't worry, it'll be fine. So like, what you're describing is what I see a lot is people want to do things if state is different, right? So that's kind of like the intent. So in one way, you could say maybe we need to like, instead of having a use state hook, we have a hook that builds upon use state that provides that ability, or maybe instead of use effect, we have a hook that provides that ability. So what I'm trying to say is, like, what is the actual intent? Why are we trying to look at the previous state? Like, what is it in the previous state that's interesting?
Well, in some instances, I've been that if like if the select component has changed and like other ones haven't, because they're kind of like related to each other, I have like a state, like a list of states and a list of localities in a state, for example. And like if the when you render, I want to like do a database call with like the initial ones that are set. And
Mm-hmm.
then if the state changes, like from Alabama to Alaska, it should not render the it shouldn't call the database, but it should then re-render the options for the localities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like there are conditions like, and then if I do some other change, it's like, oh well, the state didn't change, so like it should now run. So like I've been having to keep track of with a use previous hook on that. And it makes me think about like what is that called? Like what am I doing? Like use like because it's something to do with like initial render. I like can't even describe what I'm trying to do
Yeah.
into a camel case
I,
sentence
I
of
no,
some sort.
I think that was great. Like, to me, I was hearing maybe two things. Like, one is the use once type thing, right? Like, I think that makes sense to be separate. But then I really am interested in what you were describing in the second case, where you want to re-render something, right? What is so to me, when I'm hearing that, I'm hearing when something changes, re-render. When something is changed, like when some event occurs, re-render. Is that really what we're saying? Or not like re-render that part
Yeah,
or whatever?
yeah, like the process I've been building, it's like a use effect with the previous and the current state being passed in as the dependencies. And then I am doing a big if wrapper around the whole use
Mm-hmm.
effect. And it's like only if they do not equal each other am I allowed to run this. Because like then it'll run the thing and then the side effect will change the state and it will listen to the thing and it'll be like, oh no, they're equal to each other now, so we don't run this time.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So it's
what?
like it when they're like run if not synchronized or something. I don't know.
Well, it sounds to me like what you're really trying to do is just run this code when a value changes, right?
Right. But it like it's not allowed to run when the previous and the current are set, right? Because like the dependency array on the use effect depends on those both of those values and they like I'm not really sure
Like
how
you're
I'm
saying,
describing it. I would have
like
to look at the code.
yeah, like you're saying you don't want the code to run if both of those values have been set.
Yeah, it's like there's been like on initial rendering of a state thing is triggered,
Mm-hmm.
right? And or like a re-render is triggered and the effects trigger. And I have like an instance where it was double rendering because the previous version of the state was not set. And then when the initial render happens, that state variable has now triggered the use effect. And it's like, so if the previous state was undefined and the current one is now defined,
Mm-hmm.
it needs to like run this effect. But if they both equal each other now and we're at like a stasis, it shouldn't continue to eternally re-render.
Yeah.
Otherwise you get like in this re-render loop.
What it sounds like you might be describing is actually the introduction of two sort of primitives, two hooks. Like maybe you have a use on change, and then you have another that's a use on defined or whatever. I'm maybe that's not quite right. You'd have to look at your actual case and figure it out. But I'm just trying to
No,
tease
that
out
makes
the
sense.
process that I would use. It's like what is going
Yeah,
on,
that
what
that
are
makes
the
sense.
constraints, what's the intent, and then trying to turn that into like just an English language thing. And I don't think about like
Right.
how I would define it or the mechanics of it at first. I try to think of it as like what would be really readable to me and what would allow me to think about this at a higher level.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting trying to like come up with a camel case sentence for these very primitive like things that you're doing, because it's like it's hard to zone in on the exact way to say
Well,
it proper.
yeah, and I think like what I usually try to do is find other cases where I'm doing something the same or similar, and usually that helps me formulate the right terminology to use or the right hook to come up with or whatever it is. But if you're looking at one case, it can be a lot harder to do that because it's harder to see the patterns between things. And when you see those patterns, it's much easier to be like, oh, aha, okay, that's the similarity. I can extract that into a new thing.
Right. That's why I'm still a little bit what about this second time, like this morning. What is this thing? So yeah, trying to figure out what it is. And
Yeah.
hopefully I won't get to a third instance of it and I'll be okay not having to figure it out. I can
Well,
move on with others.
my suspicion is you already have other
Absolutely not.
instances.
Right.
And you're just not
It's
recognizing
breaking
them
everywhere else.
yet.
Right.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, I hope that was like, I know that was super spur of the moment. I hope that was useful to people to see. Maybe not the result that we came up with necessarily, but my process and how I would look at that. And it's not
No, I
easy.
think that was very great.
Yeah, so I'd say it's not easy, but it's definitely something you could just start playing around with. And it definitely takes some learning. To me, it's probably comes more natural because I have literally made my own programming languages and implemented them, and I've spent tons of time thinking about languages and all these different things. So like, it probably comes a little easier. But I think even if you're not that versed in languages in general, if you just use that bottom up approach of looking for patterns and looking for, the commonalities in that domain, whether you're working in, React hooks or whether it's your specific, business domain or whatever, I think if you just start playing around with it and do really simple things and build it up over time, you'll end up with a DSL. And that's exactly what I do. I don't try to set out to design some perfect DSL language. I just build up these little things little bit by little bit over time, and I just keep going over the code again and again when I get a chance and looking for patterns. And what I usually find is I find patterns in the building blocks I created the first time. So I'll be like, oh, wait a minute, this hook and this hook that I created as sort of a DSL could be reformulated as this more general purpose thing. And I can rebuild everything using that now. That's usually how it goes for me. I try not to get overwhelmed. I just start out real simple.
Well, I'm not like a big master guru like you are, so my toolkit of DSL utilities and JavaScript is pretty small. But like I have like a folder that I call, I guess, helpers or something, where I
Yes.
feel like I'm always putting the same code in there. And I started putting together like an actual repository where I can like access my own helpers like rather quickly and then just import them into a project that I use, so I don't have to have a helpers folder anymore, pretty
Yeah.
much.
I mean, I bet like it's sort of probably a hodgepodge maybe of domains that is in that code, but That's absolutely the way I do it. I have a very similar thing, and over time I just keep building it up, and you'll end up with more of a language. And at that point, you can sit down and try to like maybe think through it more, and maybe you'll find better ways, new paradigms. You'll be like, oh, I could reformulate this way or whatever. So once you reach that point, you can start doing those things. But it definitely, I love your approach of just helpers. Just don't think about it too much. Just put them to the side, and they'll sort of, if you keep working at it, they can blossom into a really good DSL.
Well, in this is where we get into like testing software, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, are we going to write tests?" And I'm like, "Well, what type of test do we need to write?" And this is where like a approach of like, okay, do a really good end-to-end front-end test to like see the app being used based on like what the user does, right? Because
Yeah,
that's all that
your
really
integration
matters is like these
tests. Yep.
people using this thing. And then you have all your utilities and helpers where you should have to some degree abstracted out like really important logic so it's not all in your UI.
Yeah.
And then you can like test these components separately and then know reliably like, okay, this this component takes an array and it gets parsed through this shuffle array thing. I should expect that without having to test this component or view, I can just know that the array is shuffling and I can rely on the DSL at that layer.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a major benefit of DSLs is concentrate your testing effort there, and you'll get way more return on your investment than just the like scatter shot approach or just trying to do it
Do we
everywhere.
do snapshot testing? Do we like why are we what does that even do?
Yeah, I mean, there's like,
Yeah, it looks like that.
yeah, we should definitely have an episode on testing, but like there are definitely like a lot of different ways and whys you would do for when to do different testing. But like I think it's very clear that with a DSL, you get much more bang for your buck if you do testing on it than on other things.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so I would
Love it.
say, yeah, so sort of reaching the conclusion here, talking about React specifically, we talked a lot about hooks. I think you can also do DSLs with components. And I don't know actually if I've ever heard anyone else describe what I'm about to talk about this way, but we just had an episode where we talked about Chakra UI. You also have MUI, you have component libraries. I see those as also a form of DSL. And this is something that came up in our Chakra UI episode is how it felt really uniform and put well together. That's to me in my head, I'm like light bulb, like, oh yeah, that's like a well-designed DSL. Like somebody went through probably this bottom-up process and then kept refining it until they ended up with this DSL that describes a common application really well.
Man, don't even get me on the topic of Chakra UI and Material UI. I like had to dip into a Material UI project this morning, and I was just like, I don't have access to all these style props. This is horrible. I have to write JS. Like, I just want to make this thing have a margin bottom, and I have to put a box around it.
Now
Jeez.
you know how I felt when I joined that project, and I was like, "Oh God, what is this? I have to do JSS and CSS." And I'm like, I kept trying to put style props on things, and it wasn't working. I'm like, why isn't this working?
Right.
I'll be like, "Wait, it's working
yeah,
here.
there's some
Why doesn't it
nasty
work
stuff
here?"
in that project from when we had no clue what we were doing, trying to figure out that mess.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, we've ranted about that probably enough in other episodes at this point.
We just keep taking
Yeah.
Material UI.
It's hard not to. Anyways, yes, I'm not gonna say it. So we're gonna do a conclusion to this episode. I think in conclusion, don't be overwhelmed. It would be I like to look at maybe other DSLs and see how they work and what they look like to get an idea of things as well. But don't be overwhelmed. You can just start by doing what we talked about, pulling out your helpers or looking at hooks, or you don't have to make a big deal out of it. It's just, you know, over time and experience that you put into it, you'll end up with something good, I think. I know all of you out there are that type of programmer. So,
Well, you asked me in the beginning of the episode if I could go back to a 16-year-old and be like, do this, learn the concept of DSLs and begin building your JavaScript DSL library to reference it earlier
I
um,
yeah, I'm
as a joke more.
yeah, I was gonna say that's like definitely a challenging part about learning is there's things that could help you, but you might not understand it yet or well enough,
Yeah, that's life.
Yeah, I mean, like I totally agree.
Some things just take time.
I think that as well about a lot of things, but then I'm like, would I even have been able to do that at that age or that level of experience? I don't know. Um,
Right.
but
You would
yeah,
have just confused them even more. Like, hey, do this.
yeah,
What?
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think we're gonna close this one out now. Did you have anything else you wanted to say, Austin? Otherwise, we'll shut it down.
Yeah, this prepare for the shut off reboot procedure. Prepare for our next podcast coming up where we're going
Hey,
to go a little bit more into this and
uh,
how we talk about creating entire workflows based around this concept to create efficient businesses.
yeah, definitely. What are we calling that one?
Um
Building flows,
hang on, I'm
not
going to go there.
apps. Yeah, so
Yeah,
definitely look forward to the next episode 16. Building flows, not apps.
Sweet 16,
Yes,
baby.
exactly. Yeah, so it's been a lot of fun with you on here,
An
Austin.
honor.
It's been an honor. I don't know. I guess I need to be more Klingon, but yeah.
Yes,
It's been such an honor working with you, Austin.
it is. I matey.
Yeah, it's been great hearing about how you got into programming and discussing this pretty big topic in a short amount of time. Yeah, so once again, if you have feedback or questions, the React Show at owlcreek.studio is the place to find us. And I'm not going to do any plugs or anything like that today because I feel like I've done them recently. I'm sure Austin's like glaring at me over there, but we're gonna
Yeah, they were removed from the show notes, and I'm like, No,
yeah.
it's good. It's good.
Yeah, so I hope you all have a good weekend or whenever you listen to this, and we'll join you again later. Bye.